I'm Bev Smith, along with my piano mellow man this evening. And Hilton Felton is awfully mellow this evening. We welcome you to Our Voices. Tonight, a very serious conversation. A conversation really prompted by some statistics that have us concerned. Those statistics suggest that 1 out of 4 African American black men are in jail. And the ages are frightening, between the ages of 20 to 29. What does that do to our community? What impact will it have on African American families? That's our conversation tonight. Come and meet the people who are as concerned as we are here on Our Voices. Join us as we say good evening to, and I'm going to take my time because they do a lot of things. Haki Madhubuti. He's an author, a publisher, a professor at Chicago State University, and he's the publisher of the Third World Press, also the director of the Institute of Positive Education. We welcome him to the show. Nkechi Taifa. She is the chairperson of the D.C. chapter of the National Conference of Black Lawyers, a lawyer and an author. We welcome her. Ron Steele is the president of the African American Writers Guild and a freelance writer. And Useni Perkins, an author, a social worker, and the president of the Disabled Museum of African American Art. We welcome you.
Thank you.
We welcome you. I said I was concerned. I really am concerned that those statistics, as frightening as they are, may not paint a clear picture. And in not painting a clear picture, may send out a message we don't want heard. Am I overly concerned? Is the picture clear?
No, I don't think that you're overly concerned. In fact, I think that every black person in this country should be concerned in regard to what's happening to African American men. And this is just one of the indicators, so 1 out of 4, which means that at least 1 out of 4 African American men between the ages of 18 and 24 will have some engagement, some encounter with the criminal justice system. And once you have been identified within that system, then we can assume that the remainder of your life may be a continuation of certain kinds of engagements with the criminal justice system. So we should be concerned, yes.
But I think what I'm concerned about is not even when you get to the jail, is how we're getting to the jail. Why young men, and we're talking about African American men, have become so violent, and why it appears to me that we are feeding off each other, that there is a African American frenzy to get at each other. Haki, you are smiling.
Well, this is cultural. Black men do not come out of the womb killing each other, beating their wives or mates, stealing from each other. That essentially we all do, we've been taught to do. And that we have to realize that our whole association and with this country has been one of violence, that we live in a very violent culture. And we have been boxed in a situation which we have very little control over.
Can I stop you for just a moment? You're a nice, handsome man, bright as you can be, but I just have a problem with that as an excuse for some of our behavior, and let me tell you why. And then you can jump in, because I know you probably will. You say it's a learned behavior.
Yes, it is.
That's not new for African American people. We were brought here violently. We lived here violently. We were conditioned to violence, but we did not, before integration, internalize that violence on each other with the degree and with the violent attitude that we are internalizing it now.
Well, you mentioned a key term, integration. Prior to integration, we realized that our families were very important, that the keep the family intact really was one of the major determinants of whether people will be strong or not. Integration, we brought into a whole new set of values, values that essentially said to us that America worked. But by buying into those values, what happened to our communities was essentially the destruction of our communities. Black businesses, black communities in whole, the whole school system began to go. And I'm saying that this is not accidental. I don't believe in making excuses, but we have to understand that essentially that racism or white supremacy is not only alive and well in this country, it's a growth industry. And that black men represent the major threat to white male rule.
But that's not new. It's always been that way.
An interesting phenomenon is that these youth that we're speaking of, this age that was in the sentencing report dealing with the 1 in every 4 black males, the age of between 20 and 29, these youth were born during the early 70s or the late 60s. They did not grow up during that period of time of the black pride and self-esteem and the like that many others of us grew up with. And they internalized a whole different set of values than did people who grew up during that particular time period. And I really think that that's one of the fundamental reasons why many of our youth are exhibiting some of the behavior that they're exhibiting today.
Then I have to address a point. If they were not raised during that period of awareness, certainly they were exposed to it. I mean, how could you avoid, if you were African American in the 60s and the 70s, whether you were 2 or 20, hearing Stokely Carmichael's phrase, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." So are you saying that their parents, who were a part of that period, did not pass that on to them?
Exactly right.
Let me identify some other factors, and I don't think it's making excuses. I do think we have to look at the factors. There's 2 segments to this. What are the contributing factors to this situation, and then what are some of the remedies? And I think hopefully that will come out of our discussion. But the deindustrialization of this country, we've lost over 30 million jobs, mostly in the large urban cities. And about 43% of the black workforce has been put out of work in the past 10 years. Okay, that's one contributing factor. And also, the deterioration of public schools. The schools have completely failed. The schools have failed, and they have contributed greatly to the lack of socialization and the lack of education, the lack of basic cognitive skills that kids need. The whole desocialization of youth, the disunification of the African American family, and also the debilitating health status of African Americans. These are just some of the factors that contribute to this problem. And unless we look at these factors as a whole, because you cannot identify either one as being the factor, but they cannot be ignored.
We have to take a break. Well, let's do this. Let's take a break. Let's get you involved. And how do you do that? Well, you just pick up your phone and dial 1-800-344-BETV. 1-800-344-BETV. We're talking about you tonight, and we want you to lift your voices. If you're close to us here in the Virginia, Maryland, and Washington area code 202-636-2060. We'll take a break, and when we return, let's examine the factors that go into these startling statistics right after this.
It's not an opportunity.
Okay, we're continuing our conversation, and it's getting better and better. We're talking about what's happening to young people, what's happening to our African American community. And although our emphasis is on a study that came out that talked about the fact that 1 in 4 black men are endangered species, will end in jail or caught up in the system. And with the, the comparison between white women and black women, we are still in jail more than others. We're looking at why tonight, and we want you to get involved. 1-800-344-BETV. Now, during the break, I kept going like this, and like this, and like this. Go ahead.
I like to make this comment. We should not only be concerned about those statistics, we should be alarmed and outraged. The reason for those statistics are clear. The system that we live in is designed, or for us, it is designed to be conducive. It acts almost as a magnet for our socially degenerate behavior, for the worse in us. The criminal justice system acts like a magnet, drawing us into that system. So African American parents have to be aware of this, and we have to do what we can to not only make our children aware of it, but to instill upon them a strong self-esteem.
Well, what happened to that? What happened to the mother who used to say to her son, boy, don't you do that? Because if you do that, you're going to get in trouble. And if you get in trouble and go to jail, you could die. Boy, don't you do that.
When I was coming up, our parents were older. We had a support system in our community. I came up during the crust as segregation was ending. And because of segregation, although there were a lot of negative aspects, there were also some positive aspects. We looked out for each other. And we also had a family structure where parents didn't have children as teenagers. Since the 1960s, whatever feels good, do it, we've had a breakdown of our value system. You had once teenage pregnancy was taboo. In D.C., there was a school set aside for teen pregnancies, for parents of for teenagers who were pregnant.
You did not go to the prom, you did not go to school, you went to the school.
It's a part of the social fabric. I mean, there are a lot of teenagers who have children now, and you have children raising children. You don't have the support system we had before.
But are you suggesting, Ron, and are you suggesting, and are you suggesting, and are you suggesting that integration did that? Because it may have, but didn't we do it to ourselves?
It wasn't just integration, but the main thing here is that more than ever, African American parents need to build a self-esteem. And the way to do that, the way to get the most out of black people, is to teach them what it is to be black, to teach them the value of being black, to teach them their history, to teach them that they are the offspring of the founders of civilization, all the arts and sciences, that even in America, in spite of oppression, in spite of slavery and disenfranchisement, we produce America's industry, the agriculture industry, farming, the whole works. We are a very ingenious, creative people, but in order for us to tap that creative ingenuity, that genetic creative ingenuity, we have to know our history and heritage. We have to know the way of our people. And all too often, the children of today have no concept of not only ancient history, but recent history.
That's our fault.
That's true. And that's our responsibility. No matter what's going on outside our community.
It's our fault. It's not just our fault. I really have to play the devil's advocate there, where I agree 100% with what Ronald says, 1,000% in terms of what he says. There were forces outside of us, okay, that is causing some of what's manifesting right now. Let me just give you a couple of quick examples. I read a book quite a long time ago. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, called The Godfather. And in that book, it stated, when all the dons or whatever they're called were sitting around the table dealing with how they were going to deal with the country and all, the drugs, they said, the drug traffic, it was just coming up. They said, what I'm going to do, and this is one of the Godfathers talking, is to keep the traffic limited to the black communities, to give it to the coloreds. We're not going to give it to our youth.
No, they said nigger in the films,
you're
and they
probably
said
right.
the heroin would go to Harlem where the niggers are,
right.
because that's what they want.
Their souls, well, maybe it did say that's what they want, but it said let them lose their souls with drugs. And it was right after that. True, The Godfather is arguably fiction, but what has happened within the last 20 years
But The Godfather was fiction. Are you suggesting that even though it was fiction, there is some element of truth?
No question. And I just want to put out another fact here. Around the same period of time was the period of time in which the Federal Bureau of Investigation, under its then director, J. Edgar Hoover, had a program. And that program specifically said that it was going to expose, misdirect, discredit, disrupt, and otherwise neutralize the activities of black nationalist groupings and leadership and their spokesmen, their membership, and their supporters, and it went on. But what was very interesting about that program that was directed against our people is that it said a final goal of that program was to stop the long-range growth of these organizations, or of black pride and black histories, especially among the youth. And the FBI, that memorandum specifically stated that specific tactics would be developed to stop these things.
Okay, but you hear what you're saying to me, though. You're absolutely right. But Hoover had not only a list for those, he had a list for Jewish publishers and printers, he had a list for white young college students. Here's what I'd like to dwell on. What is our responsibility? Because even at a time when books were not as prevalent as they are now, some older person in the community said to you, you are somebody. You got it through your church. Some black school teacher told you. I mean, when are we going to look at our own responsibility for telling each other what we're about, and not look to the white man to tell us what we need for ourselves?
I think some groups are doing this, and you do hit on a very important point, that we're talking about the socialization of young people. And I feel that in the 60s, that's when some of our institutions began to, as Haki was trying to say, the integration just diverted us from some of our own institution building, and it did. And we're beginning to realize now that had we maintained some of those institutions that have carried us from slavery and through all of the hardships that we have endured, that things would be different today. But our institutions are failing our young people, and not just the so-called white institutions, but also our black institutions, our churches, and of course the family, the whole disunification, the school system. We have to do something to replace this socialization process.
The question that I'm going to keep asking is why? No. Why? I have to take a call. The little man in my ear just told me, please go to the phones, but I've got to come back to why. Why? The threat against Africans who are here in America has always been there. I said during the break, forget this idea of eliminating racism. It is always going to be at the core because it's economic. Racism is economic. And so it's always going to be there. But what about our responsibility to ourselves? I think that's what we need.
If you can't define that responsibility, then you won't act responsible.
But our responsibility is to teach and educate our youth, to teach and educate each other. And that's happening. There are book discussion groups that are springing up all across the country. There's a movement toward African-centric curriculum and educational institutions. That is the key to turning our situation around. Like you say, racism is going to always be there.
Always.
Once we come together, once we learn to respect ourselves and each other, there is nothing, no force in this country or this world that can stop
Let's go to
our
the phone.
ascension.
Good evening. Thank you for being out there. Thank you for joining us. Give me your first name and where you're calling from.
My name is Felton, and I'm calling from Peoria, Illinois.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Beverly, you're very wonderful and logical in the things you say, and I agree with you totally. It's time to overlook and stop blaming the white man for everything. We used to be taught, and when I'm 41 years old, when I was taught, and all those in my peer group was taught to respect each other, and we have gotten away from the Bible, which is, a lot of people throw the Bible out, but the Bible teaches about a wise son makes a glad father. Heed your mother's instruction. And we had a generation grow up 15 or 20 years ago. They started having babies having babies, and they didn't teach the young men or young women anything about life, respect for each other. And it's time for us as black people to forget about the white man in this instance, and let's start going back to the old way of teaching. Boy, do what's right. Girl, do the right thing. Get your education. But to keep talking about going back to Africa, it won't help us in this situation, the African train of thought. I think we need to get back to the basics, and the Bible is the basic foundation. Because we used to be God-fearing, church-going people, black people. But we gotten away from it. We gotten into, education, and we're too knowledgeable. So
all right, let's get some. Yes, of course.
I think the church has been negligent in doing exactly what the gentleman has said, that the church has abrogated its responsibility, I believe, in the last 20 or 30 years to provide some kinds of positive programs for African-American youth. You go throughout this country and you go to most churches and they're empty during the weekdays, and a lot of these churches have facilities, they have gymnasiums, they are not providing programs. Every black church in this country should have some kind of after-school program.
Every day.
So the church has to assume some leadership, and I don't think that's being done. I'm not talking about all churches, because there is a movement on the part of some churches. Even right here in D.C., you have the Congress National Black Churches, and they're organizing some national programs relating to rites of passage.
But to the degree of black churches in the community, no, they're not. Nor is the YMCA. Or the Rotary Club that is black.
This is what I was talking about, the institutions failing.
They're not doing it either.
See, but now you're agreeing with, I'm talking about these institutions. These institutions have been failing, and we have to do something to regenerate these institutions to be more accountable to the needs of African American youth. That's our responsibility.
Let's take a break. And when we come back, how do we make us accountable? How do we wake up the church and the institutions right after this? And do I get all the mail from the ministers? continuing our conversation about what is happening to us. I guess that's safe to say we all agree we're asking that question and trying to come up with some solutions. And if you have some, join us in conversation. Phone lines are open. Let's go to the phone. Good evening. Thank you for being out there. You're on Our Voices. Your first name?
My name is Patty. I'm calling from Washington, D.C. The question that I have for the panel is, we listen to these talk shows 5 times a week. We hear the same basis. It started in slavery, integration, the civil rights movement, and we always hear the same thing. We need church involvement. We need this to build up the black family. But what concrete solutions do you have as being black leaders and black professionals for the black community? We always hear the same thing, and I never see anybody actually taking a step to do anything.
All right, Haki, you have been far too quiet.
Well, I think that ideas run the world. Christianity is an idea, Islam is an idea, democracy is an idea. Whether you're Alpha or Omega or a member of the Sugar Hill Gang, it's an idea. Black people do not control ideas in this country or the world. One of the major problems is that we have lost control of, say, something as simple as critical thinking. We don't think critically about the world.
But she wants solutions.
Well, a solution is to begin to think critically about our communities. If you stand in front of a television set 6 hours a day, you can't compete with the world. The Japanese were defeated by this country and its allies less than 40 years ago. Why is it less than 40 years they've risen to where they vacillate between number 1 and number 2 economically in the world? One of the major reasons is they even though in defeat, they maintain their family. They maintain their family, they maintain their culture, okay? They sent their children all around the world, to the westernized world, to get the best education that was possible at that time, but their children came back. There was no brain drain. We have now in the black community cultures outside of our community running the major business establishments. We have in our community our children leaving to go to the best colleges and universities. They don't come back. Why? Because they're not taught to come back. They don't see any hope in their own communities. And so the key at one level is that we have to believe in ourselves, and they have to have examples.
But she's talking about ideas. Patty, are you still there? Okay, the caller's gone. She said, I hear this all the time. I have to agree with her. I interview all day long, 5 days a week, radio and TV. You hear leaders saying the same thing. But where, as Ossie Davis asked, is the plan? If we need to begin, let me just use the churches.
Wait, hold on.
Where's the plan?
See, the problem is this. We are not a homogeneous group of people, number one. We're heterogeneous. You got thousands of leaders in this country, ministers, and for the most part, the ministers have not been doing the job. And so when you got thousands of leaders saying to their flocks that you go this direction, you're not going to have any unity.
Then how are the Jews able to do it? Because the Jew will send his or her child to that school, and then afterward they go to the temple and they learn their lesson. How are the Hispanics in Miami able to do it? How are the Asians able to do it?
Those groups that you are naming have a very close-knit culture that is based on common knowledge. And that's what set African Americans apart. That is our solution.
They didn't let people forget their history.
That's
there was
right.
a lot of talk over here about putting the blame outside of yourself or blaming the white man and all like that. And sure, you're not supposed to do that all of the time. But it's important that a group understands their history. Jews understand
That's
their history.
what
They do
bring us
not
all
let their
together.
children forget what
But they don't
happened
ask
during the
anyone
Holocaust.
else to teach their history. They teach their history themselves.
And that's what we're talking about, that we need to do these things.
All right,
we're doing it.
Yeah, but let's look at these 1 in 4. Let's look at these young African-American men. All right, I want to get back to something Useni said. Let's use the church, because I don't mind using the church. We could use the Elks, we could use the Masons, I don't mind. But let's deal with the church because they have the physical facilities. Now, just suppose you were a member of the ABC church, and you had young boys, and these were the deacons in the church, and your young boys were beginning to get involved in crime. If the community was intact, you could go to these deacons if you were a single, if you fit the statistics, single black woman raising kids, and you could say, help me with my sons. The problem is that you as an African-American single raising your children don't have the community to fall back on. Whose fault is that? I'm not going to blame the white man anymore.
Why not?
Well, you can blame them, but let's not dwell on the blame. Let's dwell on our responsibility to turn it around.
I don't have no problem with finding solutions, but at the same point, you say why it happens, that what has happened to us is not an accident. But we have to realize that black people and white people are at war. And I think that the key thing is when you look at our communities, it's actually worse than war. You're talking about this 1 in 4. It's almost like white people committing terrorism on black people. Black men. Wait a minute. No, wait a minute.
We're committing genocide on ourselves too. Come on.
We don't control the institutions, so how in the world can we be responsible for the decimation of our people?
We have never controlled the institutions, but that is no excuse for a young black boy knocking an old senior citizen in the head and taking her Social Security check. That is no excuse for young 12 and 13-year-old boys running through the halls of predominantly black schools and beating up on kids. That is no excuse for young boys screaming and hollering and making it unsafe in our communities for young black women or any black woman to walk the streets. There's no excuse for that. It didn't happen before. Why is it happening now?
There's no excuse for this massive unemployment that's happening in this country. There's no
We've always been unemployed.
Well, when we came over here, we had full employment. You know, full employment.
Yeah, but that was slavery. But we've always had a problem finding jobs. But we had dignity, we had pride, we had hope, we had faith, and we had a goal. I mean, you're talking as if this dilemma of racism, this dilemma of lack of opportunity, this dilemma of improper housing, this dilemma of poor health is something new. I've been black for over 40 years, and it's always been that way.
Let me tell you, the deterioration of public schools is relatively new. Now, let me tell you, before 1950, the public schools, at least the black students, were getting a decent education. They were developing basic skills. I know my generation, I'm 57 years old. My generation, we went to school. We may not have developed the consciousness or some of the other kinds of culture-specific programs, but we did learn how to read and write. That's not even happening today. As the school systems became more populated in the cities, in urban cities with black students, they began to deteriorate in the 60s, and we can see the results of that right now. When young students cannot read or write, when they do not develop the basic cognitive skills, that's at a disadvantage. That disadvantage has not always existed even in that system.
Okay, but help me to understand. And
let's not overlook that and just not casually dismiss it.
I'm not going to casually dismiss it.
Thank you.
But the institutions of education have always been predominantly white, controlled in terms of dollars and cents. So that meant that within the South and any city where there were a lot of blacks, our schools have been lacking. But what did we have? Even when our parents were undereducated, now listen closely, when our parents couldn't read, they insisted that you read.
We had a support system there.
Come on, folks, help me out.
That support system was disintegrated.
A lot of parents are teenagers now. A lot of parents are teenagers.
And that's our fault too.
Well, it's not your fault.
That's our fault too.
It is our fault that we haven't turned it around. But I can't blame us for the problem.
If you have a 12-year-old boy and you let that 12-year... Help me, folks. Call in and help me, please. It is our fault. I have a daughter. You have a son. Your son is 12, my daughter is 12. First of all, she has no business dating your daughter. She can't even clean her ears out, and your boy has no business with his sap flowing on my young daughter. So if it happens, if you don't know where he is, if he's out in the street past a decent hour, if his grades are falling, why is it we don't want to say it's our fault? Because it is our fault.
To some extent, I agree with you, but let's get back to the root of the matter. You're talking about the leaves on the tree. Let's get back to the root of the tree. When African Americans are re-educated about their history and heritage, it will bring about a natural rejuvenation of their behavior. All too often, we talk about a lot of the problems that we have, which are symptomatic of our ignorance of who we are. Once we become educated about our rich heritage and history, and we're not talking about going back to Africa, but we're talking about learning what it is to be black. Once you learn what it is to be black, you realize you have a higher calling in life. And no matter what goes on outside of your community, targeted to your disintegration, you'll see beyond that. I mean, my own life is an example. Without getting too personal, there was a time when I was on the wrong track. I didn't listen to anyone, and I did whatever felt good. But I read a book entitled The Autobiography of Malcolm X, and that helped explain a lot of the questions that I had about society around me. And from Malcolm X, I went on to study more books, the works of Asa Hilliard, Dr. John Henry Clark, and more. And that bolstered my self-esteem. I began to realize that I am from a very ingenious, creative stock of people. And one of the primary reasons why we misbehave is because we don't realize that. We go to an educational institution that tells us that white people have created and developed everything and black people haven't.
But a lot of the
so
reasons...
you have a poor self-esteem, and then you got white media that is constantly inundating us with negative self-images.
It never treated you kindly. Why is it you expect the master to be kind to the slave? The white media never treated you kindly.
I don't expect them to.
Okay, so here's where is the responsibility? Yes, knowing who you are.
Yes.
But along with that knowledge came responsibility. Someone told you. Way back then. I read Man, Child in the Promised Land. Richard Wright was a black boy, the whole thing, native son. But somewhere there was a mother and a father. Somewhere there was a community. Somewhere where there was a responsibility.
It's not there like it used to be.
So how do we get it back? Or can we get it back?
Through common knowledge. We have to go back to who we are.
Do you agree?
Well, I think that's very important. I think I still think that we need to... Socializing young people today within our community should be a collective responsibility. Even in terms of two-parent families, it is difficult to raise a child. And I think that we have to assume a collective responsibility. The church, the social service agency, all of the institutions in that community need to share with the socialization of young people. That's not happening.
All right, let me do this. I'm going to give you a chance, but I've been told I have to go to this phone call because they've been waiting. Then we'll take a break, and when we come back, I'll start with you on the socialization, because I'm going to tell you something. I want to know how you're going to do that with one of these young brothers who is angry and harsh and mad and out to get you. Good evening. Thank you for being out there. You're on Our Voices. Your first name and where you're calling from.
Okay, I'm Greg, and I'm calling from Kalamazoo, Michigan. I'm calling in regards to the statistics about the 20 through 29-year-old males. I am in that same age bracket, and I feel that where it's coming from is we don't have the same prevalence of black leaders like the generations before us. The generations before us had to struggle and try to get somewhere, and right after Malcolm and Martin were assassinated, we no longer, our society, the black society, was like in a limbo. And we no longer had the leadership among black men to push us forward and give us something to look forward to, a role model to follow. And from there, we just kind of like looked around and saw things like we had men going out to buy cars, and that was like our good status. Even church.
Our priorities have changed? Let me help you out. Are you saying our priorities have changed? That we no longer have the kind of leadership that you think we need to direct us?
Yes, more or less. Not even our local, we don't even have the local leadership that there was before, like new black students going into school, something to be proud about. Our things that we have to look forward to now is when we grow up, there are things like, okay, if you got a brand new Cadillac or something like that, that new status in the black community is something positive for us to look at. And so when we got our chance to make the money, I'm not one of the ones that's in prison or anything.
But you're talking about material goals have become our God. Okay,
these are based on material goals, so they went out and got it the easiest way they could, which was selling dope and things like that.
All right, that's his opinion. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we thank you for your opinion. He says materialism. He says we don't have enough leadership and voices, and we're going to talk about solutions right after this. I think it's welcome back. We're continuing our conversation. I think it's too important what he just said through the commercial break. And so I'm going to turn to Useni, and I'm going to say, you need to say what you just said to me. I'm not suggesting he's worried that we're dismissing racism. I'm not dismissing racism. As an African American, as a black person in any part of the world, you cannot dismiss racism. That's outside of you. What you do have control over is what's inside of you. How do we get that control?
I was commenting the young sister that called in earlier and said, well, she's been hearing this over and over and over. Well, that's true, and she wanted a solution. And what I was trying to indicate, there is no quick solution to this problem, and we cannot fool ourselves to think that we can come up with a quick solution. And we have to be honest enough to tell young people, this young sister that called in, there is no easy solution to this problem. I just wanted to make that statement, along with the fact that we cannot dismiss racism, because racism is alive and well, and it is still contributing to the very problems that we're having. And if we ignore that, then I think that we will be doing ourselves a disservice.
It's the major contributor. If you look at all the social barriers, look at all the areas of human activity, sports, entertainment, education, business,
marriage,
law enforcement. No, I'm talking about, look at these things that control our lives on a daily basis. If you're talking about, well, look, why is it that black men, 1 in 4, are involved at some level in the criminal justice system? Well, obviously, if black men cannot find fruitful employment, they're going to go and try to find employment someplace else. A whole underground economy come into existence. All people who've come to this country have been involved in the underground economy, but our underground economy kills us because it's basically drugs. That's not accidental. That black men do not come out of the womb selling drugs. That becomes opportunity because we don't know of anything else. Now, when I say that we're at war, I think we have to be very clear that white men see black men, especially young black men from, say, 16 to 29, that's the warrior stage, as the major enemy. That's the major threat. White men do not fear black women. White men and black women are partners, quiet as kept.
Well,
I don't care, they got a feminist movement, that when they go back home, in order for the white race to continue and develop, they have to mate with each other. Anytime the white race mate outside of the white race, they don't get white. White men do not fear black women. That's why you see in the black race all kind of colors. White men forcing themselves on black women. White men do fear black men. So therefore, all the subsystems and systems are geared toward the subtle and open and raw destruction of black men. You see what I'm saying? So therefore, whether it's in education, science, sports, I don't care what area, white supremacy controls. So you cannot belittle it.
Okay, wait a minute, but I'm not belittling it. Before we get to that, I'm not belittling it. There is no one who listens to us and views us right now that can deny us. But the question is, that news is not new. We have always known that you were the endangered species.
No, we haven't. We don't even know it now. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. What do you think a Negro is? What do you think a Negro?
Why don't you think we've known it though?
Half the people in our community cannot even articulate how we got to this land, other than saying slavery. Most of the people in the black community don't even understand what has happened in terms of the black Holocaust, the African American Holocaust.
They don't even want to call it a Holocaust.
Well, the point is, I mean, you go from the major historians, from Du Bois all the way up to Chancellor Williams, you're talking about 69 million lost at one level. But the major point I'm trying to make is that essentially black men represent the greatest threat to white male rule. And when you got that kind of threat out there, then what you do is you neutralize the threat. And so all your systems are geared toward the neutralization of the major threat, which essentially are black men. Right. And you do it at every level. In Chicago, all over this country, you got black men standing on corners if corners were made for black men to stand on. There's no work out there. You see, there's no work. And so therefore, when we try to move in at every level, our legs are chopped off.
So what do we do?
What do we do? We have to re-educate our people. We have to teach them their history and their heritage. I know I sound like a parrot repeating this, but it seems like
so where do we begin?
See, in order for us to turn our situation around, we have to have unity, and unity is predicated on common knowledge of yourself.
Let me just get something real concrete, just real concrete, real basic. If everyone out there listening just picked up my book, picked up Haki's books, picked up Useni's books, picked up Ron's articles, and read those, that would be a start.
Sure.
That is one start. That is one step.
That gets back to ideas. Nobody want to deal with ideas because they say ideas is that's not the solution. But if you're not thinking in a way in which you're saying, okay, we got to look at the 90s and we got to take the 90s. If every black father in this country said, okay, I'm going to be responsible for my children, that is an idea.
All right, now how do we do that?
There are some positive programs that are taking place, and just let me briefly identify some of them. And these programs are really focusing on socialization, early socialization, because I think that unless you improve the socialization of young black boys, you are not going to enhance the socialization of older black men. You have to begin in the formative years. There's a program that Dr. Wade Nobles has in Oakland called HALK, and it's a program that is trying to enhance the socialization process. And we talk about programs that have elders in the community. You mentioned about the deacons having a role in the church. Well, the elders assume some of that responsibility because it takes older men to raise and educate and socialize young black boys. You have a program in Chicago, Project Image. You have a number of rites of passage programs. This is what I'm saying. Rites of passage program, realizing that young men do not become men because of a chronological or physiological development. They become young men because they are educated and nurtured by other men in terms of what manhood is. You are having such programs today throughout the country. In fact, they have a national conference dealing with rites of passage.
Yes.
There's over 50 rites of passage programs that are making a very positive impact on young people. We need to have more and more of them. And I indicated you have one right here in Washington, the Congress of National Black Churches. They have programs throughout the country that are trying to enhance the socialization of black youth through positive rites of passage programs.
Okay, you said something that we don't want to slip away. And that is one solution. I want to talk about solutions because I think it's important to begin to answer her question. You said if we can make black men responsible for their children, tell me how.
One of the major problems is most of the children, fathers of these children are not men, they're boys. And therefore, that the whole value system, the whole understanding of what a man is not even a part of their lexicon on a day-to-day basis. So it gets back to essentially at one level that we as men, those sitting around this table, have to take it upon it's our responsibility. I'm saying that we run a school in Chicago, and that I'm a father of all the children in the school, whether they have fathers or not. That I will not see a young man or a young girl, young boy or young girl, come by me and doing something that's incorrect. I'm going to correct them. All right, that I'm going to be responsible. So I think that we have to
stop right there a minute, Haki. How can you do that? I'm going to be the devil's advocate. How can you do that? It is a very noble job. But again, I'm going to go back, it's not an unusual task, because in the community of old, when we had a strong black community, the elders did just that. You were very careful how you behaved in front of an elder. Role play. Young man, you're the elder. Young man is disrespecting a black woman. You approach that young man, March 1990. What do you think is going to happen?
See, the problem is, again, to get back to definitions. The bill of goods that was sold to us was around integration again, freedom. We confuse freedom with mobility, liberation with mobility. Well, we can run the streets. I can come from Chicago today. But when the people talk about true liberation, these are the questions that have to be asked. Can we feed ourselves? Can we clothe ourselves? Can we educate ourselves? Can we house ourselves? Can we defend ourselves? And I say when you answer all these questions truthfully, the answer is no. All right? So at one level, I teach my children, Useni teaches children, that you have got to always move towards self-reliance. Self-reliance means at some point that in terms of our communities, we have to be building our business ourselves. We run 4 or 5 businesses in Chicago that my children will come into, other children will come into, that essentially it's only in our community. That you look at you talk about the Jews are nationalists, the Polish are nationalists, the Irish are nationalists. You see that Asians are nationalists, so therefore they think about themselves first and foremost, but they have to be taught that. When you come out thinking that you're white, thinking that you're part of somebody else's community that don't want you in the first place, then you're confused, and all you can get from confusion is confusion.
You mean thinking that you're black. All right, but the problem is that we are still debating, because I got a phone call the other day from a lady who said, Bev, please, when you're talking on television, do not use the term African American. Please
Well, she
use
says
the
that
term
because she doesn't know what it is to be an African, and you can't expect people to identify with Africa if they don't have any positive information about Africa.
But
And
let
then
me
it
give you
goes
another
back to
example.
I have to take
Let
a
me give
break.
you another
I have to
example.
take, every time you start talking.
You want to hear some examples?
Okay, let's do this. Every time you start talking to me, I have to take a break. We'll come back and we'll give you some examples his way right after these messages. We are trying to offer some solutions to a problem that cannot be resolved in an hour, but at least we begin to lift our voices. Panel, I'm going to step back from the mic and let you talk about solutions and let you give some examples.
I just want to say very briefly, one thing that's happening throughout the country, that black men are organizing themselves and addressing some of these problems. In Portland, Oregon, I was in Portland, Oregon for 20 months, and there's a group called the Coalition of Black Men, over 200 black men that are committed to helping developing young people and doing a lot of other things. And there are black men that are organizing themselves in Houston, in Dallas, and in Oakland, and other parts of this country. I'm just saying that some black men are beginning to pull themselves together and are attempting to address this problem.
And also, there are independent Afrocentric schools all over this country. I know in Chicago, Institute of Positive Education, Brother Haki is associated with. Brother Useni talked about the rites of passage. In Washington, D.C., this Dr. Nzinga Warford Kopic, and she has a whole rites of passage program for young girls coming up called the STARS program. You have mentorship programs around. Concerned Black Men have a very excellent program here. You have the Coalition of 100 Black Women have programs. We're beginning to do things. Exactly. There's something happening. There is something different now than 10 years ago. You see the youth on the corners now, they have these medallions on in the shape of Africa. They may not know what it means. They may not know what the red, black, and green is. They may not know what by any means necessary on the back of their t-shirt is, but they're wearing the symbols. And that is one of the first steps to developing that stream of consciousness that will make it so they will not violate their bodies by being involved in the drug culture.
So is there a reawakening?
Sure there is. It is happening all across the every social, economic, and political spectrum in our society.
And that's good?
That is very good. That's the first step toward unity. See, the solution to turn our situation around is unity, and unity must be based on common knowledge. We have to reclaim our greatness by reclaiming our natural history and heritage. And then we have to look into our own lives and do what we can on our own level. I am the president of the African American Writers Guild. We are a writers support group which is dedicated to promoting African American literature and literacy in our community. I have 9 nieces and nephews.
And they're all reading. We're out of time.
Okay.
We have talked about something that we hope you will continue talking about. If you haven't started, then get started around your dinner table with each other. Talk about you and lift your voices. Until the next time, God bless. Stand up, be counted, get involved.
Know yourself.
Stay tuned for Sanford coming up next on BET.